It was one of my first assignments since being recruited by ICARUS. I was put in charge of studying this weird artifact. I didn't think I was hardly qualified for such a position, but with my history of studying things that got me put into prison, where these guys found me and plucked me up from death row, and the fact that most of us were expendable, I guess I was the perfect candidate. I say I was put in charge, but it was more like I was assigned to a team of so-called experts to study this thing, and none of us really knew what to do or what to expect, but the artifact we were to study would set the tone for my time at ICARUS. It was an old locket, estimated to be from 16th century Europe, due to its craftsmanship. Ovular shape with intricate silver weaving along its edges. It contained a single, small tooth, so tiny that it had to be from a little child. DNA testing was impossible due to the nature of the artifact, which was quickly discovered when my colleague, Walter, removed the petite tooth from its home in the locket. He was immediately met with what we came to call the Tooth Fairy. But this wasn't your ordinary, glowing, frolicking fairy tale-like kind of fairy. No, this thing was grotesque. It had long, pointy ears and a big, pointy nose to match. It was entirely bald, its skin wrinkled and folded over itself from its forehead down over its face. Bulbous eyes popped out from between folds of skin, pale and cold, and at the bottom of the creature's face, a mouth hung open, filled with dozens of tiny, thin, quill-like fangs. It wore ragged, burnt clothes that seemed to be fused to its body, and its sagging breasts were a clear indication that the creature was probably female. But other than that, it barely even looked like anything resembling human, aside from its basic humanoid form. She had the typical bug-like fairy wings, but they were all torn and tattered and hugged close to her back instead of being spread open to fly. Her clawed hands hung close to her body as well, and she appeared hunched over, with a kind of a goiter at her back. Walter was the unfortunate recipient of the Tooth Fairy's attention. She ripped open his face like a child opening a gift in a box and proceeded to devour the teeth out of his mouth, biting through the bone and sucking the teeth directly from their gums, slurping the teeth into her mouth and crunching down on them. Walter was dead shortly after she ripped his face open, and you could see his eyes go cold as she ate his molars. When she was done, she simply dropped Walter's body to the floor, retrieved the small tooth from his tightly gripped palm, and returned it to its place within the locket, and upon closing its lid, she vanished as if she had never been there. She just blinked away into nothingness, leaving the locket to drop to the floor, where she had once stood just moments earlier. The remaining handful of us stood there, slack-jawed in stunned silence. It was Stephen that finally broke the fear and tension in the room when he spoke up, asking, "What in the holy hell was that?" And it was Samantha that gave the obvious answer. The Tooth Fairy. It could not really be described as anything else. It was indeed some kind of twisted entity that resembled the beings from which fairy tales got their name, but this thing was more akin to more grim versions of fairies. Troublemakers, monstrous, feral, and savage things. And this one ate the teeth right out of Walter's mouth like it was nothing. So, Tooth Fairy. It was the perfect name for the thing called forth by that tiny tooth. But we had more questions. Many more questions. Why this tooth? Whose tooth was it? Where did this thing go when it wasn't here? Why did she look so ragged and broken? Why does she feed on teeth? All of these questions and more were left to be unanswered, unfortunately. We could not, at the time, perform any testing on the locket or its contents due to this being refusing cooperation. Perhaps a robot is needed to allow us to test this object from a distance.